and declaring the recognition of the Palestinian state is very welcome, but it doesn't go far enough, particularly in light of the events at Rafah. And as I say, Paul will cover this more, but I want to cover it in so far as I want to discuss our motion to the Dáil tomorrow, which is a motion on neutrality, calling for a preservation of the triple lock. We all know that Micheál Martin intends to produce legislation and bring it before the Dáil to end the triple lock and make it a double lock, which gives us absolutely no guarantee over the likelihood of Micheál Martin, his government or future governments sending young working class men and women to fight the wars of imperial powers abroad. And we are really definitely opposed to this, and we believe the Irish people are opposed to it, and that is why Micheál Martin nor Simon Harris will give us what we need, which is a referendum on our neutrality, to ensure that the people restate that we want to be and remain militarily neutral. Our neutrality has been compromised by the use of Shannon Airport by the US military over the decades, and our motion will also call for an end to the use of Shannon by the US military. And simultaneously tomorrow the Seanad will debate a motion to end the use of Shannon Airport. The Seanad will debate a motion on Shannon, and it'll call for the end of the use of Shannon by the US military and frequent inspections of the planes that the US fly through Shannon, which actually doesn't happen at all now. So it's really important that we get this out there and say to people that Micheál Martin has no intention of producing this legislation until after the European and the local elections. He'll get that over the hump, and then he'll produce very controversial legislation, and we want to oppose it. And we're calling on everybody, both in the Seanad and in the Dáil, to really strongly consider what they're doing here and to support both motions. If they do, we have a chance of forcing the government to carry out a referendum of the people. And we'll encash to gut.
Could I ask you about that EPA finding that Ireland is still not doing enough to reach its climate targets?
Well, do you mind, Tommy, if Paul addresses that, because he's on the Climate Committee and I have to leg it now to another meeting. But is there anything else you'd like to ask me? No?
No.
That's grand. Okay, I'm sorry I'm rushing. I'm sorry, Paul, for you.
No, you're grand.
Yeah.
If you want, I'll start on that, because we have Eamon Ryan before our Climate Committee today. I mean, I think the EPA report is another damning indictment of the government and of the Greens in government. The Greens have absolutely failed to do what they were elected to do, which is for us to act in line with the science. We're not acting in line with the science. We're not even acting in line with the legislation, which isn't in line with the science. So instead of being on track for the legislated for target of 51% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030, in a kind of best case scenario, we're on track for a 29% reduction. Why is that happening? And it's because there is a great gulf between the talk, the rhetoric of the Green Party in particular, and then their actions while in government. A very good illustration of that is the fact that the Green Party is now campaigning to be elected to the European Parliament, calling for a ban on private jets. We have a bill to ban private jets. We have brought it forward through first stage. We're going to bring it forward at second stage, and I will tell you in advance that the Green Party are going to vote against our bill to ban private jets, because the government is going to oppose it. Eamon Ryan is the Minister for Transport. Dublin Airport recently said they're not going to introduce a ban on private jets, even though there was discussion about it in the context of the passenger caps. The same is happening around the data centres, where even the Department of Enterprise are warning their own minister to say that this is not sustainable. We can't continue to ramp up the amount of electricity that we're using on data centres. They're gobbling up all the renewables that are being added to the grid, but there's a complete refusal to do anything about it. The same in terms of agribusiness, where again the Greens talk the talk, but ultimately Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the IFA, representing the biggest farmers in this country and the big agribusiness, ultimately are setting down the rules, which means that farming is not changing in the way that is needed in the interest of small farmers and in the interest of our environment. So, People should not be lulled into a sense of security that, don't worry, governments have it under control. Governments do not have it under control. Ireland is the worst emitter in Europe on a per capita basis, and that is with the Green Party in government. So I think people should draw lessons about that, I think, for the European and the local elections, and I think argue for the kind of system change that we need, to challenge to the profit system. The second thing I just wanted to talk about is, obviously this is an historic day in terms of the recognition by Ireland, by the Spanish state and by Norway of Palestine. The fact that the Palestine flag is flying over the Dáil, that's something we've pushed for a very long time. That's very, very welcome. This should be a day of, celebration of Palestinian statehood, of that recognition happening internationally. It isn't. Instead, it is a day of horror, of revulsion, of sadness at the continued acts of barbarism by Israel. Most recently, people will have seen the unbelievable pictures of children being burned alive in refugee camps, in a refugee camp in Rafah. And these are people who fled from elsewhere in Gaza. There's now over 1 million of them have fled to Rafah. In many, many cases have fled multiple times before ending up in tents in Rafah and then being targeted by Israel. This comes a few days after the International Court of Justice ruling saying not to continue this offensive on Rafah, and it's clear that Israel is determined to ignore all of that. That poses a question to the whole world. Joe Biden has repeatedly laid out red lines and said this is a red line. Attacking Rafah was meant to be a red line, but each of those red lines have been crossed, and the red lines more and more look like a red carpet, inviting them to continue on a path of genocide. Action has to be taken. And so we will be obviously using our time in terms of the statements on Palestine to recognise, welcome the recognition of a Palestinian state, but also to say that has to be married with concrete action that puts pressure on Israel to stop. Figures recently came out about the amount of dual-use goods. These are goods that can be used for military purposes being sold from Ireland to Israeli state or private companies in the defence industry in Israel, and that figure has rocketed, and they each one has to be given a license by the Department of Enterprise. So clearly no more licenses should be given for dual-use goods. We shouldn't be sending anything to Israel that can be used in the war against the Palestinian people. That's at the very, very least. We think the Israeli ambassador should be expelled, and we think we actually have to impose sanctions on the Israeli state. One very, very easy way to do that would be to actually implement the Occupied Territories Bill. So the symbolism and the rhetoric of the government, which is welcome, has to be matched with actual action that can help to create pressure internationally on Israel to stop.
What do you make of warnings from Israel of economic consequences to Ireland by doing what it's doing?
Yeah, I think it's scandalous that a representative of a genocidal regime is still in Ireland and making threats against the Irish economy, against the Irish people. I think that is a scandalous situation, and I don't know why the government tolerates it. I mean, I think that the treatment of the Irish ambassador and the Norwegian and Spanish ambassador last week was, again, outrageous. To bring them in, make them watch a film, have the media watch it, and I think there has to be a response by the Irish government to this treatment of our ambassador, to these threats from the Israeli ambassador, and that response should be to expel the Israeli ambassador. I think the time has well passed for that, but I think her position here is more and more and more untenable as every day passes.